What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset, your behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. So here we are, guys, on episode 41. Last week, I was speaking with Mr. Jerry Alexander about the commercial multiple occupancy area and flex space and renting out large buildings and splitting them up into smaller office units. This week, I'm going to be talking with the founder and CEO of Bleeper Bikes, which is a bike sharing scheme that is here in Dublin, and it's the leading bike sharing scheme that is privately owned. And if you remember back to episode number 25, I spoke with Thomas O'Connell, who is the founder and CEO of a bike sharing scheme called Moby. So I thought it only fair to bring the two guys on separately just to kind of give us the different perspectives. And Hugh is going to be an interesting conversation because Hugh is the first mover in this market. There was a thing called Dublin bikes that came out many years ago, and it's those bikes with the stands that you have to kind of go up and release your bike from this kind of magnet lock that it has. But with Hugh, he was in China and he did some stuff that we go into today. But he noticed that the Chinese brought in these dockless bike sharing schemes, and he thought, oh, there's an idea for Dublin, and so off he went with it. So we're going to be going into all of that today. Before I do, I thought I'd just give you guys a quick update on the Facebook group. It is still there, it's still active, and we're currently at, I think, 154 members. So it's slowly but steadily growing, and it's a bit of fun being able to sort of interact with the listeners, but also I get a couple of questions and topics that people would like me to cover here in the podcast. And I always suggest that you connect with me in there if you can. Alternatively, of course, you've got my social media handle, Gavin J. Gallagher. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I am spending a lot of time on Clubhouse these days. I think I've mentioned it already to you last week and maybe the week before, but I do get occasional invites from the platform, and I'm able to invite some of you guys. So if you just connect out to me and say that you'd like to have an invite, no problem, I'll send one out. Just bear in mind that it's currently only available for iPhone. That is as of the beginning of February in 2021. If you're listening. And also the other thing to remember is that for me to share, I'm going to need your mobile number. So that is something that I've had people asking, and then they're wondering why I'm looking for their mobile number, but that's how you actually share. So today we're talking to Hugh Cooney. Hugh's founder and CEO of Bleeper Bike. It's one of the leading bike share well, it is the leader, the market leader here in Dublin at the present. He deals with what do we call them? Push bikes. Whereas Thomas, who we spoke to before, deals mostly with electronic bikes. And so there's a slight difference there. It's also a very big difference in price. And so Hugh's bikes are all over the city. I think he has hundreds of them out there at the moment. Whereas Thomas, they're more expensive bikes. And so he doesn't have the same capacity to kind of spread them out all over the city. But they're both, I'm using both companies in East Point, primarily because I want to be able to offer the best choice to my tenants and the staff that work there. And so, guys, I'm not going to dwell too long on this introduction. I just think it would be worth tuning in here because bike sharing and micro-mobility is a big thing. It's going to be much, much bigger in the future. The pandemic has taught me a lot of things. We were transporting 3,500 people a day into the park on our shuttle service. And now we have a situation where there's, a handful of people coming in every day. And so we expect a big, big increase in the number of people using bike share and bringing in their own bikes. So we are looking at increasing capacity for storage, parking areas, all of that. And I would suggest that if you're in the development business, an investment business, give this some thought as well, because it's definitely going to influence it. So guys, without further ado, please welcome Mr. Hugh Cooney. Hugh, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much for having me.
It's my pleasure. And it's Friday and we're all kind of getting ready for the weekend. Where does this podcast find you? Are you at home, working from home these days?
Yeah, I've just come back from the office to do it from home. It's pretty noisy in our office with the workshop underneath it. So I was in the office for most of the day, but now I'm back in the quiet of my home.
Well, that's good. I'm still in the office, workaholic that I am.
Uh,
So tell
uh,
us, for a little bit of context, Hugh, if you can just tell us in a minute or two, who is Hugh Cooney, first of all?
Yeah. Hugh Cooney has been the CEO of Bleeper Bike for 4 years. Before that, I was an accountant, so I'm a qualified accountant. Worked with both PwC and KPMG, and before that, I actually worked in the property sector for 4 years. I spent 5 years in China. 4.5 years of those I was working with Treasury Holdings. So kind of my career out of college went from kind of property, moving back to Ireland, and then went and did my accountancy exams, and then since 2017 I've been the CEO of Bleeper.
Interesting. And just from a point of view of chronology, what years were you working in Treasury Holdings?
I was there from 2006 to 2010. So
Okay, so you went through like the crash and all that kind of stuff. That must
yeah,
have been interesting.
exactly. So when I was working in specifically on their China project, so the kind of property vehicle was Creo, so I wasn't involved with any of the stuff Treasury would have done in Dublin or throughout Ireland or indeed in Battersea or any of those projects. It was
Much to your luck. That was
yeah,
a lucky fall. I mean, geez,
yeah,
you could have spent years fighting banks and all sorts of stuff.
yeah.
Um, and tell us, Hugh, just a little bit of your backstory. Like, I mean, where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Dublin, so grew up originally Rathfarnham. Then we moved to Fox Rock. So went to primary school, Willow Park, and then my dad decided I had four sisters, so he decided boarding school was probably a safe option for secondary school. No brothers, so I went to Clongowes for secondary school. So that was kind of the two main schools, and boarded from the age of 12 to 18 in Clongowes.
That's interesting. I'll tell you just a little aside, just when you said it there, that you grew up in Rathfarnham and you moved to Foxrock. You could have taken the words out of my mouth. I actually grew up on Ballantyre Avenue in Rathfarnham and then moved to Foxrock when I was about
Oh,
5 years of age.
yeah.
And it's funny, I have four daughters and one son. So it's just,
That's
it's funny similarities there.
yeah.
Tell us, just in your early development kind of years, is there any influences, or I don't like to call them heroes, but kind of, is there anybody that kind of stood out as kind of influential in your life and somebody that you kind of wanted to emulate?
I suppose different kind of ages, there was different people. So, first teacher I can think of was teacher in Willow Park, Christy McDade. Anybody who went to Willow Park or Blackrock would know him. He set up the Willow Wheelers, and he had a very unique teaching style where he'd separate the class into three rows. There was, I remember the if I remember the sections correctly, it was the kind of the worst row to be in was jail. The middle row was purgatory, and then the best row to be in was holiday camp. And if you're sitting in holiday camp on Friday, you didn't get homework. When I look back on that, I've always responded well to short-term rewards because it was something you kind of had to the row you had to be in on Friday, and none of the other teachers I had really had that sort of setup. But was more other classes. It was all about Christmas exams, midterm exams, and summer exams. So there was, they just seemed so far off and never really motivated me to work hard. But when I was in fifth class and I thought, oh, I just had to work hard till the Friday, he seemed to get the best out of me. So he was somebody I would, when I look back on kind of my education, I think definitely someone I remember and really liked his approach to teaching people.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I never would have thought that a teacher would actually come up. So he must have had quite the impact on you to actually, for you to be bringing him up now. Hold on. Let me just turn off this telephone here. I'm disturbed in the middle of the podcast. So, and was there any kind of business icons or heroes that you kind of used to kind of look up to? I mean, every time I ask this question, the rote reply a lot of the time is Richard Branson, but I'm just curious if you had any at the time, or whether business was something that you just weren't paying attention to as a school kid.
Um, yeah, I suppose it wasn't. Yeah, well, I suppose Michael O'Leary, he went to Clongowes. So if you went to Clongowes, he would have been somebody that a lot of people would look up to. And we used to have the kind of past pupils union at a few events, and Michael spoke at. So he was always very entertaining and topical as a business person. So he'd probably be the and I do like his kind of approach to cutting out waste and that type of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, Michael
Yeah.
O'Leary would be definitely somebody I would admire.
Wow. Yeah, he's quite the character, all right. And I can see why a load of students be kind of looking back and sort of saying, geez, he worked in this school. So,
Yeah.
here's a path to follow. And do you remember any kind of particular time when the entrepreneurial kind of bug bit? Was it young, or were you kind of further into your career at that stage?
Yeah, I suppose probably fourth year in school we did mini company, and we were actually the first year in Clongowes that mini company was reintroduced, or it was reintroduced the first year it was brought in. So that was fortunate, and I really enjoyed that. I was kind of the elected as the MD of our project, and we sold these kind of training tops, rugby training tops, and it went very well. And I really enjoyed the experience. So that was probably at the kind of point at which I knew I liked the idea. Not so, I suppose I wouldn't be if kind of maybe some entrepreneurs might be the real wheeler dealer, brilliant salesperson. I'm more like the organizing and the putting a team together, and that aspect of it. So I really enjoyed that. With a class of 20 odd people in fourth year, and deciding who does what, and um, ultimately putting the best people in the right places to what was in the end a fairly successful project for 15, 16-year-olds.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's I'm actually reading a book at the moment called Who Not How. And it's a good book, but the whole point of it is that whenever an entrepreneur is trying to solve a problem, you shouldn't be thinking how to solve it. You should be thinking who can solve this for me, so that you kind of magnify your capabilities and just have a team of people that have different skills and know which one to call upon for a
Absolutely.
particular thing. Interesting. Well, before we get into bleeper bikes, I'd love to kind of just know, you went to China and you worked for Treasury Holdings, which, for anyone who's not familiar with the story, Treasury Holdings is one of the more successful property businesses in Ireland, and it's run by two very sort of well-known characters, Johnny Ronan and Richard Barrett, and both of them would have been very successful. Well, they obviously went through their ups and downs in 2008, but extremely successful businessmen, both in their own right, and then working together as a team. I think they were pretty unstoppable. And so I'm just curious, like, was there any, what was it like working for them? What was it like working in China? And was there any kind of insights that you got from working there, or working with them in particular, that kind of has stood to you going forward?
Yeah, and there's a lot of things I learned working for Treasury, because it was such an entrepreneurial company, and I was involved in the China office, which really just I was one of the first 4 or 5 employees, so I saw it from the very beginning. And when you start in a company early, you see all of the interesting things that you mightn't see when the company is more mature. But Yeah, Richard, China was Richard Barrett's project. So obviously Treasury Holdings was both Richard and Johnny Ronan, but I would know Richard much better because I was all the time in their China office. But it was really like there's a few things when I think of Richard's style that I definitely kind of take certain characteristics I couldn't necessarily use in an accounting firm, but when you have your own business, you can be a bit more free to do what you feel is best. So one of those is make very quick decisions. So Richard was excellent, and there was no dithering. If something needed to be done, it just got done straight away. So that's something I really took with me, is just get stuff done, because opportunities can just fall even like a couple of weeks or a couple of months of the market can change and you can miss an opportunity. So that was one really interesting thing about Treasury Holdings, is the speed at which we did stuff. And another interesting aspect, as well as Richard Barrett being part of the small initial team in Treasury Holdings China, so was Rory Williams, who is now the CEO of the Ronan Group. So he has gone and he was the chief legal officer for Treasury Holdings, and he's now gone with Johnny for Johnny's own property company that he set up. So I had access to two really very talented people in their own field. And Richard, the other thing about Richard, like Richard was Treasury Holdings was property focused, but Richard is a true entrepreneur. So if it wasn't property, it would have been something else. He's relentlessly driven, and it's not necessarily relentless drive to build beautiful buildings. It's relentless drive to do business. So that it ended up being real estate was his focus, but he had the core personality to be successful, and he is successful in lots of other things. So I suppose the one thing, there's lots of other little things, but the one thing is the speed at which Treasury Holdings executed things was remarkable. And I think they saw the benefit of that characteristic in 2007. 2007 was when the financial crash happened, kind of July, August, September. Creo, we had a big transaction that Richard had secured in April 2007. And he had 2 months to secure the fundraising and negotiate the purchase agreements with the seller. It was a big famous property developer in Macau called Stanley Ho. And Stanley Ho was very old and has lots of wives. So he basically said to Richard, right, if you don't close this in 60 days, you're not doing it. And it was kind of deemed impossible by people back in April to close this in 60 days, because as well as the property due diligence on Stanley's assets, Richard had to go and raise 250 million of equity. And we had to then secure 750 million, 750 million it was, of bank loans. It was a 1 billion plus transaction. Stanley was selling 2 massive office buildings in Shanghai, along with a retail complex. So anyway, being the way Treasury operated, it got done from agreeing MOU to paying over Stanley. It all got done in 60 days, and that closed in very early June 2007. If that had gone on much longer, the Richard wouldn't have been able to raise that equity, and that was just always the way he did it. It was just no dithering and
no bottlenecks at all. Just fire.
Exactly. And it certainly stood to him in June 2007 because things changed so significantly just a couple of months after.
Geez, yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I remember that time so well, and I can remember being involved in a couple of different projects simultaneously, and trying to juggle a couple of projects at the same time. It's really difficult because everybody wants decision making out of you. And I remember, trying to deal with one complicated problem, and the other stuff is just all on hold while you're trying to deal with that one problem. So I can't imagine what it must be like at a level where you're up there at a bit in the billions,
Yeah.
And tell me this: did you you left Treasury and you went then and came back to Ireland? Is it?
Yeah, I came back to Ireland in April 2010.
Okay. So you're right in the middle of the recession when you arrived back.
Yeah, exactly. So I decided I wanted to move back, and when I moved back, the IMF were already here, so NAMA had been established at that stage. So my dad was an accountant, and he kind of said, nobody was recruiting other than NAMA in the property game. I actually did do a job interview for NAMA, but because all my experience was in China, I didn't get a job with them. And my dad said that. I did accountancy in college. Go back and do your accountancy exams. Even though the normal route is straight out of college, the chartered accountancy it's since kind of developed where you could go back, and do it even if it wasn't the very next step after college. So that's what I did, and I got a job with PwC in their corporate finance department, and kind of ended up still doing a lot of property related stuff because a lot of work that would have come into corporate finance at that time was business plans for NAMA.
Yeah.
So I spent 3.5 years there doing my accountancy exams and doing a lot of NAMA related business plans, that there was so many of them been done at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure you could tell us plenty of stories.
Yeah, we all can from those years, and it's amazing just how context changes. I remember looking at the NAMA business plan and the NAMA model that they used to want, their debtors, as they would call them, to use, and they had this behind it, like projections 10 years out, like that would have been back in 2002, 10 years out, 2020, and what they would expect to get back. And I remember thinking, based on the value of some of the assets, then God, there's not a hope NAMA are going to get anything close to this. And
The
in
end
the
of it.
end, things just turn around. So,
It
and
is amazing. Yeah, it was around 15, wasn't it? 2015 or 2014 when everything started to kind of move into gear. Yeah,
exactly.
interesting times. And so let's get into bleeper bikes. You spotted an opportunity. Tell us about. I mean, you were in KPMG, and you got a nice cushy job. You're earning a weekly or a monthly paycheck. Everything is rosy, and you've decided. What made you want to jump out and start a company that in the area of bicycles?
Well, I suppose so I left PwC at the end of 2013, and I moved to KPMG. So from 2014 onwards, I was with KPMG, and it was in 2016 that I ultimately kind of came across the bike sharing idea, and I suppose I always kind of liked the idea of running my own business, and I used to use Dublin bikes a lot. So that kind of where it came about, and I was over in China with my partner on holidays. So I used to go back to China a lot for holidays. I still love China, but I saw in 2016 when I was on a trip in Shanghai, the first kind of the stationless bike sharing model was invented in China in 2016, and I saw, and their first city they launched in was Shanghai. When I saw that, I thought, God, Dublin bikes is already fantastic, but look at this use of the mobile phone and the simplification of everything. Wouldn't this be fantastic in Dublin? And I just spent kind of the next 6 months after coming across it in China, figuring out how I could bring that to Dublin. So I was kind of, still had my job at KPMG, but figuring out whether it was realistic and whether there was enough of a chance to pack in a job and do it full time. And at the end of the 6 months, I came to the decision it was. And 4 years later, I'm glad I did. It's been a tough 4 years. Business is never plain sailing, but um, I know that the whole stationless model and the connectivity of the bikes compared to the chunky stations that Dublin Bikes requires, that's absolutely the future. And
Sure. Yeah.
different ways of moving around a city, other than just the car as the future as well. So there was enough things. It's always a huge risk setting up a business, but there was enough things that were going in that direction anyway, that it was a risk worth taking. And I'm very, very happy I did.
Yeah. Well, looking back, it looks like a great move, but at the time, it's very difficult to decide whether it's the right decision or not. And micro mobility is the big buzzword nowadays, but in 2016, no one was really talking about it. And I can totally relate to what you're saying. I mean, I think we've been trying to get the Dublin Bikes into East Point for years and years and years, and they have like such a backlog or something like that it never happened anyway. But
Yeah,
it used to frustrate the hell out of me that I'd jump on a Dublin bike. And these are, to anyone who's listening who's not familiar, this is the bikes that actually have a station. So you have to find a place and actually like click it into place when you're finished with the bike. So I was living in Dublin at the time, and I used to walk out the front door of the house, and very close by there was a load of these Dublin bikes sitting in these stations. So you'd punch in your code, you'd remove the bike that's released, and off you go. But when I pulled up outside my office, the bike stands would almost always be completely full. And so I'd have to cycle off to the next one. And if that was full, I'd have to cycle off to the next one looking for an empty one. And sometimes there was an app on the phone that would tell you if there was an empty one, but the app didn't update as quickly. So I would arrive at a station that said that there was 2 free spaces, and the spaces would be gone. So I used to go bonkers, and you'd end up nearly cycling back to the house where you started to kind
yeah,
of find an empty station. So your product absolutely like makes 100% sense. Like the fact that you can just lock it anywhere, and you don't need a station. You can just basically bring it up and park it outside your home or whatever, and
yeah.
that's it. Somebody else can come along then and take it as they need it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the what's restricted Dublin Bikes expanding. There's loads of demand for it. Like East Point Business Park would be a perfect location for a station, but the further away they go from the city centre, the costs just come exponential. So it's very successful in the city centre, um, but if they're to start adding stations to keep, they try to keep the stations within 300 meters of each other. The stations cost a fortune, and all of that hardware costs a fortune. So while the demand is there, the underlying hardware that is needed to build a station just it doesn't give you enough of a kind of a cost benefit when you move out of the heavily densely populated city center.
Yeah, every 300 meters, the further you go out, it really exponentially increases the number of stations that you need. Yeah,
Exactly.
expensive.
Yeah, but
And you still have that problem of stations being full,
yeah,
particularly busy areas like the central business district at 9 o'clock in the morning is just
yeah.
there's just no stations available.
Yeah, and the other problem with that is because the stations cost so much to build, and the smallest station really, I think that economically viable would have at least 20 parking stations. Normally it's 40 parking stations. So therefore they're restricted in available street space because there's not so many places around Dublin where you can fit, 20 to 40 uh, kind of docking bays. Whereas with our model, like because it just needs a Sheffield stand, there can be 2 racks here, 20 yards down the road, another 2, depending on what space is available.
Yeah.
But station-based schemes, because the groundworks needed to be done and connecting it to the grid, because they need electricity. They can't do nice small little pockets here or there. It has to be relatively large footprint for the 20 to 40 stations.
And do you monitor the usage of Dublin bikes or the success of Dublin bikes? Because I don't think I've jumped on a Dublin bike in years now.
Yeah.
Um, since Bleeper Bike came along, I think I would have thought that it's actually replaced a lot of the usage of Dublin bikes.
Yeah, well, I suppose if you have a Dublin bikes outside your house and outside where you're going to work, you're probably still going to use Dublin bikes because it's subsidized. it's the government pay a significant top up to keep that going every year. So people are charged €35, but that's not nowhere near covering its operating costs, never mind any payback on the capital investment that it's cost. So for those where it's very convenient, and they still use it, but for people like yourself, where your destination doesn't have a station, we have definitely filled the gap there. And I know they're still way bigger than us, but our goal would be in 5 years' time to do more trips in them, notwithstanding the fact that they're cheaper than us because they're subsidized. I think we'll be able to hold our prices, but still do more trips in them based on providing a more convenient and better service.
I mean, we'll obviously get into, where you see micro mobility going and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to go back to those, 6 months when you were working on the business plan. Like, what were your key objectives back then? I mean, obviously it's a new concept even. I mean, Dublin Bikes was obviously there as an example, but you're basically a pioneer and you're trying to bring in something. I mean, did you have to go out and find investors, or did you fund this out of your own pocket, or how did you get started?
Yeah, I had to raise money. So I had to kind of do the typical early process for any new company of friends and family, because nobody, almost nobody who doesn't know you isn't going to invest in something that hasn't yet started. So I had to get kind of seed capital. I had to figure out what the regulations were around doing this, what permits would be needed. And I had to kind of make an educated guess as to why people would use our service versus Dublin Bikes. So yeah, the business plan had, as everyone's setting out, a very, very ambitious assumptions about how successful it would be, and we'd start being profitable from the first few weeks, and these things never end up happening. But before you start, you're always overly ambitious, because if you weren't, you'd probably never get started. So I was very optimistic about how quickly it would take off, and that kind of allowed me have the guts to just go straight into it. And that's what we did, and we've learned loads that we didn't know now, but you just have to kind of go in a bit blindly to these things.
Tell me, did you have a mentor or anyone to kind of guide you on the journey?
No, not at the beginning. I didn't. There's a lot of great facilities now that I know of, in terms of Enterprise Ireland's programs and some of the startup hubs in Dublin. When I started off this, I wasn't as knowledgeable about the startup community, so time was of the essence, and that's why I kind of come back to what I learned back in Treasury, is how quickly they used to execute. Time was of the essence when I was getting started, because bike sharing had gotten the interest because it had been so successful in trying to have lots of people, not just Bleeper. So I wanted to move very quickly, and
first mover advantage.
Yeah, and therefore I didn't have the time to maybe join some of the incubator programs, and and I wasn't involved with Enterprise Ireland back then. So now I have mentors, and I know different people who give me great advice. But for the first year and a half, I didn't.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that must have been a tough period of trying to guess a lot of the stuff as you're kind of on your way. And I mean, just comparing today with back then, like, what's the importance of a mentor?
Because they've seen it before. Like, you learn so much from your mistakes, but I suppose some of it is, well, until you've made the mistakes, you just think you won't make them. So I'd say some of it is maybe good, that it was maybe a year and a half later that I found a mentor, because I could see the value in them. But I suppose my mentor that I have through like Enterprise Ireland's HBSU company, he would see a lot of other startups and kind of introduce you to some concepts that are proven to work, that I used to be a bit skeptical towards, but now not as skeptical as I was when I started out. And also introduce like simple things like what, we'd ask what's the kind of one area of the business you're weak in and would like an introduction to, and I would say that. And they have such a connection through being involved in the startup community for so long. He was able to introduce me to someone who's been able to help us. So is the connections and just showing you the tools that are proven to work for businesses would be two big things we've gotten out of the mentors.
And when before the mentors came on board, you were kind of feeling your way through it just yourself. At what stage did you sort of start to feel confident that this was going to work?
I always knew it was going to work. It was just about whether we got our timing and whether we'd have enough money to be able to be there when it would kind of take off. Because, when you're competing against an alternative that's subsidized, you're not going to win on price. So therefore, it's going to take you a while to build up your credibility and other things that will make customers choose you. So it was, it's, I really think we're only at the tip of the iceberg. Like we did 400,000 trips last year.
400,000. Wow, that's a big number. Yeah.
Dublin Bikes they dropped they used to do about 4 million, but they did about 2 million last year. So we still only did 20% of theirs. So, we're nowhere near where I think we could be in terms of the amount of numbers of trips we get. And we're improving all the time. Like there's bugs in our app that we're solving every kind of couple of weeks. We get on top of another bug, and there's a finite number of bugs before the user experience is just perfect. So I know when the user experience of the app is perfect, and there's a couple of things on the design of the bike, and we'll have a new version of a bike and at some point. So I know when we have all of the components perfect, it will really take off. It's just moving around by bike is just so much easier. We'll get there with making eliminating all the user experience, and 4 million trips and beyond is what I'd like to be doing in 5 years' time.
5 years, okay. And do you need to expand beyond Dublin to do that, or do you see yourself just staying focused on this market?
See myself staying focused on Dublin. There's Cork, Galway, Limerick have a scheme that's subsidised by the NTA, and to a certain extent, if the NTA,
that's the National Transport Association
Authority,
yeah, okay,
they've invested in those schemes, and I get some sense that within the NTA there's people that might be a bit fearful that they would be criticised for that investment not being a good investment if Bleeper went to those places and it was a huge success. So kind of need to let those schemes do their thing, and maybe there will be a realization somewhere down the road that Bleeper bike is overall good for the state, but I don't want to be pushing against a closed door, because this is a transport public service, low margins. If you've got people trying to kind of resist you and make life difficult for you, it's already very difficult. That if there's external forces for whatever reason, then not worth it. Better off kind of putting our entrepreneurial energy in other areas.
Yeah, well, there's enough sort of wreckage along the road from businesses that did try to take on big, incumbents. And Ryanair, you mentioned earlier, I mean, back in the early days, they had a really difficult time with British Airways and Aer Lingus and all of that kind of stuff. People just don't like the small guy coming in and starting to kind of hoover up business on them.
Yeah, exactly. And Michael O'Leary was fantastic for ending, being able to succeed in spite of that. But there's way more companies that fail because you have those resisting forces. So I prefer to take on too many battles if we can keep our self busy focusing on areas where there's not resisting forces in the way.
Now, I wanted to just ask you, I mean, I know from I don't know China the way you know China, but I have seen articles and photographs of, mountains of bicycles that they kind of overblowed, went kind of a bit over the top on the bike share thing. Like, what in your opinion went wrong there? And how do you know that you're not going in the same kind of problematic direction?
Yeah, I suppose in China, their local authorities were hands off and kind of allowed the Chinese companies who were in bike sharing put out as many bikes as they liked, and European cities that was never going to work. And we tried in June 2017. I tried to uh, deploy bikes in the city centre without having the full blessing of of Dublin City Council, and they took our bikes off the street.
Right.
So I was the person who thought I didn't need permission, and it backfired. So, but thankfully, we were able to wait a year for the rules to be brought in. But in China, the companies just put the bikes out there, and the government didn't come down hard on them. And now they're starting to come down harder and harder because it's just maybe they thought the problem would solve itself after a year. It didn't. There's still too many bikes on the streets. Um, and I hear from people I know over there that they're really uh, taking more and more bikes off the street. So it's getting solved. It's hard to explain why it's a very entrepreneurial country. So maybe on one hand, the government wanted to really encourage this industry that was born out of China. So they did, and in doing that, they over encouraged it. So I'd say that has something to do with it. That it was like, their invention. The last thing they wanted to do is, discourage the number of bikes on the streets. And unfortunately, that just doesn't work when you've limited number of street space.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to lay down the rules because private companies don't perform well when
Given just an open book. Yeah.
exactly.
I have seen, to anyone who's not familiar, like there are photographs on Google and stuff that you can look at, and I'm talking mountains of bicycles, like, maybe 1 million bicycles or something like that. It's just incredible. And so many of these companies, they just went off, raised huge amounts of capital, bought millions of bicycles, and just like deployed them everywhere. And so you were kind of walking down the street, and the footpath was just like completely blocked by bicycles everywhere. And that is just bringing me to my next point, Hugh, is there, because one of the biggest concerns I have in East Point, we've been approached by multiple scooter companies looking to kind of put electric scooters in. And we had one person saying, that they were prepared to give us 50 scooters completely free and just like leave them in the park. And we actually turned it down because from my point of view, it would turn into some sort of a similar problem where people are just, dropping them everywhere. How do we control the parking of scooters? And I mean, clearly, you have control now of the way your bikes are parked, and people are kind of expected to put them in specific locations and stuff. How do you control that stuff? Because if you become a nuisance, then you can kind of expect some fallout from that, with local authorities kind of like saying, either you sort this out or we're going to kind of pull your license or whatever.
Yeah, I think the operators like ours have to be sensible. Like there's a lot of people who say, oh, the bikes or the scooters should be allowed park anywhere because that's better for the user experience. But that just doesn't work, because if 10% of the people are lazy and park them outside your door and outside the door of Spar, the people will be sick of that very quickly. And unfortunately, there are 10% of people who will always not care about others, and they won't kind of park in a nice, tidy way. So I think for the next 12 to 18 months, it just has to be traditional rules around them being locked to proper parking infrastructure, either the same bike, either for our bikes have to be parked the same type of bike rack as somebody would park a private bike, and scooters, it should be the same. Maybe there's a simpler version of it because a scooter doesn't need as much kind of surface area to lean against, but they need to be locked to something for the next year, 2 years, until they're just normalized a bit, because there's both just ignorant people who'll use them and park them wherever they feel like, and then there's also kids and other people who come along and just for the sake of being a nuisance will throw them into the middle of the road. So I think safe approach is just they need to be locked to something fixed into the ground. A year and a year and a half to be improvements in technology. Geofencing is a big thing, as in that will mean the user has to park it in a certain space. But it may rule out the ignorant people who just park wherever they feel like it, but it won't rule out the kids and other people who come and lift it and throw it. A bit like you see trolleys. You see it's very similar
Yeah,
problem.
shopping trolley.
There's a rule trolleys got tethered to each other and we all have to pay €1. It's because there's just enough people out there that don't give a damn, and if something can be moved and put in people's way, they'll do that. So
yeah, it's a good point. It's human behavior is just to take the easy way out and like wheel the trolley right up to your car and then just drive off and leave it right there in somebody else's parking space.
exactly.
So obviously that €1 or €2 that you have to put in kind of trains people to kind of bring it back and reclaim their euro.
Exactly.
That's an interesting one. Yeah. And I mean, in terms of scooters, because I mean, the next big thing, I see them now every day driving into work. I can see, you notice I'm saying driving into work. I see more and more and more electric scooters. And I understand that they're not actually permitted by law yet, but I think there's going to be changes to that coming soon. But one of the biggest issues you have with them is charging them, because like if what you were saying about parking in a Sheffield stand, but that's not going to be much use to somebody with a scooter if it runs out of batteries. So how is that going to be solved? Have you got any kind of thoughts on how this is being going to be approached?
Yeah, I suppose if scooter for your own, if you have a privately owned scooter, obviously you'll take care of the charging yourself. You'll just carry it into your office. For shared scooters, in the same way the bleeper bikes are shared, the keeping the batteries charged is a very big cost, and it's questionable whether the unit economics make sense. The big companies will say, "Yeah, we're making loads of money," but if they're having to send staff out swapping over batteries, to kind of make sure that they're charged for the next user, it's very, very expensive. So I don't really have a very good answer for that, other than it's something that the industry is really trying to solve and come up with creative ways to try and make the cost of swapping over the batteries and keeping the vehicles charged as low as possible.
And
But
what do you think of? I mean, I know that Lime, or one of those companies in San Francisco, they brought in a thing where if you brought the bike into your home in the evening and charged it up, that you actually could make some money on it. But that then turned into like turf wars, where people were sort of saying, "This is my area. You can't take any bike or scooters in from here. These are mine." Is that an issue, or is that something that you can kind of foresee doing in Dublin, or is it just that's been ruled out?
I think that's been ruled out, and Lyman and the rest of the big companies now are employing their own people to go around with. So all the batteries now have swappable batteries. So the first generation, they had to bring the scooters back to the warehouse. So they have swappable batteries, but it's still a big cost having your staff going around swapping batteries, and being able to kind of cover all of these operating costs, and the scooter to still be a low enough cost that users are willing to pay. So it's not a great business model if you've got like loads of staff going around Dublin swapping over batteries. So there's a lot of money going into it. One of the answers might be the bigger the battery, the less it needs to be swapped over, between kind of, you can get more trips out of it before it needs to be swapped over. There's talk about wireless charging. So maybe there will be kind of docking bays for them all that can be just kind of become wireless chargers. So loads of money and loads of entrepreneurs focusing on this sector, but the perfect solution isn't out there yet.
Yeah. And is there, I mean, talking about the micro mobility sector in general, what are you most excited about in the coming years?
Most excited about cities like Dublin eventually getting to a percentage of people commuting by bike. That really should, like Dublin is so flat, and we've only like 3 or 4% of people cycle by bike. Cities like Copenhagen, Amsterdam, it's more like 50% of people commute by bike. So is where it will be in 10, 20 years. It won't be 3%, it might not be 50%, but it's going to be something a multiple more than the amount of people that commute by bike today, because we've just got a perfect city for it. So it's just enjoying seeing how this all plays out and how many more people start cycling. And I think it's the perfect it also the fact that not just something that is destined to take off anyway, but the whole shared versus ownership economy, and how it applies so well to a bike. If you want to be an annual member of Bleeper Bike, which gets you 4 rides for an hour each day, it's €75 per year to own your own bike. The lock and the lights alone will cost you €75. Never mind your annual maintenance, and so therefore, not even thinking about the cost of buying your own bike, the accessories and the servicing would cost you more than an annual Bleeper Bike membership. So the kind of the value offering of sharing a bike versus owning your own bike is very compelling. So that's kind of one thing that more and more people are starting to do the maths on. Should I rent or share versus own? And then we're in a kind of a space with cycling and a micromobility that is destined to boom. So there's two things I think that are going to make numbers move in our favor in terms of increasing our passenger numbers.
Yeah, it's something to be excited about, right? If those are the numbers, like 3% versus 50%, there's a lot of growth potential in there.
Absolutely.
Interesting. And in terms of just strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that, I mean, what would you say is the biggest struggle that you've had running your own business? And I'll get into your superpower as well. But I mean, in terms of the struggles that you found, what's the most difficult thing that you face as a kind of just a CEO or a founder trying to run your business?
Yeah, I suppose I wouldn't be the natural salesman, and for any business you have to sell, and you have to convince either a buyer or a stakeholder to come around to your way. So that wouldn't be something I'm brilliant at. So you need that. So that would be something that I would love to be better at.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. It's not everyone. Not everyone's cut out to be the sales guy. So it's it's tough. Do you use other people? Like, have you got salespeople now in your team, or?
It's not even it's not sales in that sense, because the bikes kind of sell themselves. It's convincing people, whether it be
Local authority or something.
Councillors or local authorities as well. It's selling in that sense.
So it's persuasion is what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So but persuading is what we need to do to sell, because we need to get permission to kind of provide the service. So
there's a great book, by the way. There's a guy called Robert Cialdini, I think his name is, and he's got a book called Persuasion, and it's all of that kind of stuff. It's how to be a better person at persuading people to kind of help you and things like that. He's got all these kind of subliminal things that actually are going on in your head.
Okay,
so it's worth
to give that a read.
Yeah, it's worth it. It's very interesting, and he goes into all sorts of stuff like even he went into the Hare Krishna and the fact that they used to hand this flower to you, and they went into the science behind that. And he said, And the reason they were handing a flower to you is that if somebody gives you something for free, you feel obligated to kind of even just be nice and listen to them. Do you know what I mean? Like, you've received something and therefore now you owe something to them. And what they used to do is the person they would watch, and the person would, listen to them, maybe give them some money, do whatever, and then they go around the corner and they dump the flower on the ground and they just continue walking. And the Hare Krishna knew this would happen, and they would walk over and they would pick up the flower so that they could use it for the next guy. And this was just, but it's actually, there's a science to the persuasion and all that kind of stuff. So it's well worth having a look at that book.
Okay.
And that's a good segue. Just wanted to know, is there any books that you would recommend? Are you an avid reader, or is there anything that you think that would be useful for people to read?
No, I'm not an avid reader, but the one kind of book I've read over the last couple of years that I found helpful, because back to the fact that I wouldn't consider myself a great persuader or salesman, however you want to say, would be it's the Shoe Dog.
Oh yeah, Nike, the founder of Nike.
Nike guy, something Knight. I've forgotten his
Philip
name.
Knight, yeah.
Philip Knight, that's it. But that, I really enjoyed that, because he was kind of the same. You think of Nike and you assume there's going to be some slick, brilliant salesperson behind it, but he kind of described himself as an introvert and didn't like selling. So I liked that, because I thought, geez, to run a good business, you don't have to be a brilliant salesperson. So that's,
yeah, and to grow something so massively, like he's a real inspiration. And it's funny you say that, because that you're the second guest I've asked that who's come up with Shoe Dog and Philip Knight. So
really great book.
That has to be a book that everyone will have to go out and buy now. I have it in my own bookshelf, all right. Personal habits that have contributed to your success. Can you identify anything?
I've always been very organized. I used to, in Clongowes, they used to call me after the name of a teacher that was almost OCD with organized Asians. So I've always been very organized, and I think that stands to me well when you've got to run, and we've 13 people working for the company now, and we don't have the resources to kind of employ HR people and that stuff. So you've got to be, as a CEO, to keep everything going and keep everyone happy, you've got to be organized, and that's a habit, I think, that got slagged for a lot in school, but I'm glad
it stands to you now.
Yeah, it stands to me, exactly.
And Hugh, what age are you now at this stage?
39.
Okay, so you're coming close to the big 40.
Yeah.
Tell me
this year.
What advice would you give your 20-year-old self now, with all the experience that you have? Is there any particular advice that stands out?
No, I think when I look back to different things, everything has helped me in some way. Obviously the time in China has helped what I'm doing today, and the time I did in PwC and KPMG helps me a lot as well, because I can look after all our own stuff that other founders might need a CFO for. So is just keep, if you do want to set up your own business, don't go do it just for the sake of it. Keep doing stuff that will help you, is beneficial to you in some way, and only go set up a business if you really think there's a chance in it. Because a lot of people say they'd love to set up their own business, but the right opportunity mightn't be the first thing you think of. So don't think you're missing out, because when you're waiting for the right opportunity, once you're upskilling in some other area, that skill will help you at some point.
Yeah, that's good advice. A lot of people seem to be caught by the glamour of entrepreneurship, and if you go and check almost any profile on Instagram these days, it has entrepreneur written there, and it's like a badge of honor. Yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, and it's amazing. It used to be that being like a footballer or an athlete or a movie star, that was what everyone wanted to be. But it seems like nowadays it's entrepreneur.
Yeah,
and
that will change, like everything. But it does seem to be in fashion at the moment.
Well, there's no quicker way to go, to lose hair or go gray than to start your own business. That's true. I don't think a lot of people realize that. Certainly the glamour of it. And that's one of the reasons why I actually quite like listening to Gary Vaynerchuk, is because he's quite authentic in that regard as he comes out and he says, this is not for everyone, and don't get caught up in the glamour and the kind of this sense that, I'm going to become a multimillionaire. As Richard Branson used to say, when somebody asked him, how do you become a millionaire? He says, it's really easy. Start out as a billionaire and then invest in an airline business.
Yeah.
And quick enough, he became a millionaire. All right. Well, look, Hugh, it's been really great to have this conversation today. I just wondered if you have any advice that, if you got any particular advice that you'd like to part, is there anything that you think that would stand to our listeners in going forward with their own careers and stuff?
Just back to that point is, whatever you're doing at the time, if you're learning something, well then what you really love to do will come along at the right time. But sometimes people rush into things too quickly, but just keep learning and picking up a skill, and an opportunity will come at some time, but don't force it and jump at the first thing that comes your way.
Be patient.
Be patient and be picky.
Yeah, that's good advice. How can people find you if they wanted to reach out, Hugh?
LinkedIn is the best way. So Hugh Cooney at LinkedIn.
And what about your website, Bleeper Bike?
My website, so our website's bleeperactive.com.
Bleeperactive.com. Okay. Great stuff. All right, Hugh. Lovely to talk to you, and wishing you every success with Bleeper Bikes, and long may your continued rise and success. And I'm looking forward to hearing you telling us that you've hit 15 or 20% of bike users in Dublin City.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Gavin. It's been a pleasure.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that with the conversation with Hugh Cooney. And he's I've gone and put a lot of the links that we discussed there today into the show notes. So you're going to find a link to Bleeper Bikes, a link to Dublin Bikes, just so you can see what we're talking about in case you're not aware. And then I put links to the various books that were discussed. So we had Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. We had a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini. I think I called it Persuasion in the interview, but it's actually called Influence. And then Hugh mentioned his book that he liked, which was Shoe Dog by Philip Knight. So I put links in there to those 3 books. And then I've also put a reference to Treasury Holdings to anyone who doesn't know what Treasury Holdings is. If you're Irish and you're in the real estate game, it's highly likely you'll have heard of it before, because they were kind of the giants in the Irish market. But for anyone outside, just a little reference there, probably a wiki page or something like that. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed the podcast this week. That is all for episode 41. I'm your host, Gavin. I am reading the wrong intro. That's it for... So that's it for episode 41 of Behind the Facade. Thank you so much for listening. Please find the web links as discussed in the show notes. If you found this episode useful, please share it out with a friend. And if you have time, please give us either a 5-star rating or a review over on the iTunes platform or wherever you listen to. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, again, you'll find me in the Behind the Facade community in Facebook, or alternatively on my social media handle, Gavin J. Gallagher. I'm about to kick off with a clubhouse room now, so you guys, I hope to see you soon, and I guess I'll catch you all next week. Take care.